Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. Redditors who have lived in a haunted house. What are your most unexplainable paranormal experiences? Story 1. The Unfinished Room.
So I used to live in a big house by myself. I was there as a hiring perk and to look after the place for my boss who lived out of state but owned the home. One of those win-win situations. The first couple of months were fine, but when winter came I started hearing things coming from the second floor. It started with little bumps and bangs coming from above where I had my computer set up and progressed to distinct footsteps coming and going across the second floor. I had been up to the second floor to check up on it from time to time, and I knew that there were unfinished areas up there. One place always stuck out, an unfinished room that was a sort of walk-in closet for one of the upstairs bedrooms. It was attached to the garage attic. It was open when I went up to investigate the noises. I shut the door and locked it. 2 nights later, more noises. Footsteps leading from unfinished room to the bathroom, then nothing. The worst part, the door. The door that led to the unfinished room would not stay closed or locked. I tried everything. Eventually I pushed the bed up against the door to keep it from opening. That seemed to work. A few months went by without the door coming open, but I would find it unlocked all the time. As time passed, I would hear noises all over the house. Mostly footsteps, but the occasional thump with no explanation. I cannot explain how horrifying it is to hear little taps up and down the hall from the other side of a bathroom door during your morning shower. I eventually moved out, but another employee moved in to take my place. His stay there only lasted about a month. The story he told me is that he was shaving one morning before work and he heard a slam, like someone dropped a heavy stack of books right outside his bedroom door, then heavy footsteps, like someone running down the hall. He won't stay there anymore, and no one in the company will live in the house.
Story 2. The Mysterious Shadow.
When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I remember waking up to see a large shadow standing at the foot of my bed. I was living with my dad at the time. He had a very large 5-story terrace house built in the 1800s. Every so often there would be an unexplainable event, such as footsteps when there was no one there, or voices. On the night this happened, it was just my dad and me in the house. My sister was staying with my mum at the time. I woke up and noticed that the door to my room was wide open. I normally sleep with it closed. I then became aware of a large, approximately 7 foot tall, shadow-like figure watching me from the end of the bed. When the figure noticed me, it seemed to melt into the floor, and the door to my room slammed shut. Understandably, I was slightly traumatized by the whole experience. The next day I asked my dad if he had been in my room, and he denied any knowledge of the event. He's not the type of person who likes jokes.
Story 3. The Maid from the 1800s.
My uncle's house, located in a very eastern part of New York, was said to be haunted because of the family that used to own it in the 1800s. They decided not to give it to the stableman and instead sold it. It was said that the stableman and the maid haunted the place after that. We always used to joke that you could hear people or things moving at night, but since the house was so old, we would just laugh it off. One night, my uncle's friend had her and her sister stay over at the house. The friend noticed a maid bringing towels down the stairs when she woke up. Later, she saw the maid again, bringing what looked like a percolator down the stairs. She was so impressed that my uncle had hired staff. He is a neurologist in New York City, so he had a habit of spending a little extra. She went back to bed and later woke up downstairs to find my uncle and his friend just chatting. She asked where the maid went, thinking that the maid was cooking breakfast. My uncle had no idea what she was talking about and asked what the maid looked like. The sister explained, and he laughed. He then walked her to the living room and pointed to an old picture. She said that was the woman. My uncle replied, "Yeah, she has been dead for about 100 years.
Story 4. Living in a haunted house.
I lived in an old, haunted house in college. Things got so strange that everyone moved out except for me and one roommate. Here are a few of the bizarre things that happened. I woke up at 3 a.m. because my roommate's door kept opening and slamming shut. From my bed, I yelled for him to stop, only to realize I was the only one home that weekend. As soon as I yelled, the slamming stopped, but then the hippie beads I had hanging outside my closed door began to sway perfectly, yet violently against the door frame. This went on for about half an hour while I debated whether I should remove my air conditioning unit and jump out of the window. I just laid in the fetal position in bed until it finally stopped. I woke up at 3 a.m. again, alone this time, hearing a Nintendo game console on the back porch playing loudly. I assumed a drunk kid had come in and started playing. I grabbed a baseball bat and walked toward the back of the house as the music got louder and louder. As soon as I opened the door, everything went completely silent. Keep in mind, the music had been loud enough to wake me up. I had friends over one day and told them the house was haunted. No one believed me, so I asked the ghost to do anything to prove it was there. As soon as I asked, all the lights in the house began flickering for about a minute straight. This was in the middle of the day, and everyone witnessed it. Almost everyone who stayed at my house had sleep paralysis at least once while living there. Every time something spooky happened, the house would smell like an old lady's strong, flowery perfume. This house had a door built into the floor that led to the basement. We always had a rug covering it up so no one knew it was there. Things would constantly go missing in the house, only to turn up in the basement. The house also had a coal chute from when it was heated by coal back in the day. Missing things would always be placed on the chute for us to come and get them. One night, my roommate had a strange experience. While playing video games late at night, he saw mist hovering from the kitchen and then moving into the bathroom. The bathroom had a trap door that led to the attic, which is where we figured the old lady's ghost liked to hang out. Another time, my roommate was up late and went to lock the doors and turn off the lights. When he turned his back on the room and walked to the door, someone breathed into his ear and said hi. He thought it was me, but when he turned around, he realized I was sleeping. He was so frightened that he ran to his room, too scared to turn off the lights or the television. We would hear loud thumps in the attic at all hours. For peace of mind, we told ourselves that squirrels must have gotten in there. Voices would wake us up in the middle of the night. I spent many mornings sitting on the front porch, waiting for the sun to come up before going back inside the house. Coincidentally, years later, I had a friend who rented from the same landlord, same town, but a different house. He and all of his roommates moved out because that house was also haunted. At first, I didn't think it was too strange, until he told me that when all the weird things happened, they were accompanied by an old lady's strong, flowery perfume. Also, a lot of people had sleep paralysis in that house as well.
Story 5. The house that terrified my family.
I'm not exactly sure what to believe since a lot of the paranormal occurrences happened to my dad, but I definitely saw and heard some creepy things while living in a house during my teenage years. We frequently had a sense of anxiety and foreboding in the house, which on its own isn't necessarily paranormal, but it certainly made it very uneasy to stay there. I read somewhere that radon exposure can cause anxiety, and the house did have a radon problem, so maybe that could have been it. But I also heard footsteps around the house when I was the only one there, and constantly felt like someone was watching me. My dad got the worst of it and claimed he could hear sounds coming from the basement at night. His bedroom was right near it, while mine was upstairs, so I never heard any of it, but I am an extremely deep sleeper. Then there were the traditional slams, bangs, and crashes throughout the house. My dad also claimed he would hear knocking on the cellar door. Sometimes he would hear a woman screaming. Supposedly, every family who had ever lived there experienced something. There are 3 distinct things that stand out. The night before we moved out, my dad claims he woke up because he felt a sudden hard tapping on his head. My brother's girlfriend was staying over, and my dad and I were both gone. We came back to find that his girlfriend's daughter was terrified because she saw a shadow in the corner of the room. I chalked it up to a child's imagination running wild. One time my dad was practicing with his band in the basement and was expecting me back from a Christmas party. He claims he heard heavy footsteps from upstairs and thought it was me, so he went upstairs to greet me, but nobody was home. I got home about half an hour later. It got to the point where my dad had the house blessed, and the priest claimed to have been terrified and refused to go into the house at first. This was around the time I was becoming an atheist, so I didn't really believe in any of that, but I definitely experienced the uneasiness and occasional random noises, though I never experienced any of the screaming or knocking my dad claimed to have heard. At one point, we had some people from the Atlantic Paranormal Society associated with, but not featured on the Ghost Hunters show, visit us and conduct a sweep of the house. We got some of the typical orb pictures, which both my brother and I thought was silly. But at one point, being a bit of an edgy person thinking I had psychic powers, I told them to take a picture in one specific spot. The result was an image of what appeared to be a ghostly bust of a person with a demented face. We tried to explain it as a reflection from the washing machine, but it looked too much like a person. If I can dig up the image, I'll post it, but I'll have to search through my dad's Facebook account. We also have an entry on the website The Shadowlands that I submitted. Look for the entry for Quobarg Avenue there.
Story 6. The Girl in the Attic.
When I was younger, I used to take naps upstairs, but by the time I was 8 years old, I absolutely refused to go upstairs. The upstairs had 2 large attics that ran from one side of the upstairs all the way to the other side on both sides. It was essentially a crawl space that was maybe 30 feet long. It started one day when a friend and I went crawling from one side to the other with flashlights, like kids normally do. Then I saw a girl sitting there in the corner, acting like she wanted to play with us. I know a lot of people say that when they see a ghost, they aren't scared, just interested. Nope, I was beyond terrified. This girl looked normal, had blonde hair, a nice dress, and seemed friendly. I stayed silent, kept crawling behind my friend, and got out of the closet. I told him what I saw in there, and he said he didn't see it, but felt like he didn't want to go back in. Then my parents would occasionally send me upstairs to get something, and when I would get up there, I would see the doors swing open, as if they were trying to get me to come inside. I would lose toys and wouldn't be able to find them anywhere. Suddenly, my parents would be fishing out Christmas presents out of the attic, and we would find some of my toys in there. I remember being 8 years old, my parents still asleep in the morning, and I leashed up my dog to go take on the monster in the attic. My dog, usually up for anything, refused to go off the top step into the attic. My parents never believed me with all the weird things that happened in that house. I would get blamed for things that happened all over the house, leaving lights on, toys all over, things I knew I didn't do. Well, anyway, we moved out of there when I was 10. Not a week passed before the new owners called us up and asked if the house was haunted. Their daughter sleeps upstairs and she says that she has been playing with a blonde-haired girl at night. My parents laughed at how crazy these new homeowners must be. To make an already long story short, the girl started appearing in other parts of the house. For them, they kept in contact with us. They would look over while watching TV and see the girl sitting on their daughter's lap, etc. They looked up the past owners of the house on the computer, found an old dressmaker that lived there, and yep, a picture of the little girl wearing one of the lady's dresses. The family that moved in there was absolutely torn apart by the events. They got divorced, the dad stayed living in the house, and ended up taking his own life in that house.
Story 7. A bittersweet farewell.
In 2012, my stepfather overdosed on heroin and dropped dead in the hallway in his condo apartment. My mom had to move out shortly after since they were already behind on mortgage bills. A few months later, my lease went up and I was barely making ends meet and couldn't find a new roommate. My mom offered me the key to the condo apartment to squat for a few months until I saved up enough for my own apartment. I took the offer and moved into the condo apartment. After a month or so, I was asleep in the living room, and I had this dream of him standing in the hallway, facing the living room. He was looking at me and smiling. He even made a stupid joke and everything. It wasn't disturbing at all, just bittersweet. Then I suddenly woke when I felt some pressure stroking down my head and back. There was nothing around me, and it freaked me out. As a skeptical person who doesn't believe in the paranormal, it has to be some kind of sensory hallucination. It was still nice to see him in my dream once again, though. Made me tear up typing this. Rest in peace, Darren. An interesting fact, he dropped dead on July 13th in 2012, on a Friday the 13th.
Story 8. Living with doppelgangers.
I lived in a house that seemed to be haunted by doppelgangers. Every event that happened never involved some mysterious figure, but a known person being in a place where they should not have been. Here are a few examples. I was a teenager at the time, and I was instant messaging my girlfriend at the time with my webcam turned on. I had the viewer up so that I could see myself in the webcam. Behind me, there were the stairs leading up, left of camera view, and the entrance to the living room, right of camera view. My younger sister would typically fall asleep every night on the couch, in front of the television, and make her way up to bed in the middle of the night. At one point in my webcam view, I saw my sister leave the living room and go up the stairs. The thing that struck me as odd was that I didn't hear anything. It was an older Victorian house, so the wooden floor and stairs were very loud. Without saying anything to my girlfriend, I got up and looked into the living room, and there was my sister passed out on the couch. I sat back down and asked my girlfriend if she had seen anything in my camera. She said, "Yeah, I just saw your sister go upstairs." My family was all getting ready to go somewhere. I was sitting in the car with my mom, and we were waiting on my sister who was still in the house. After a bit, she comes out and gets in the car and just looks at me like, "What happened?" I ask her what's wrong, and she says that just before she walked out of the house, she thought I was still inside. So she yelled up the stairs, "Hey, we're leaving." And apparently I yelled back, "Okay, I'll be down in a minute." Some more examples, since many people have asked. My mom woke up to someone tapping her foot, and she said someone was standing at the end of her bed who faded out After a couple of seconds, she said it looked like me. I had an encounter where I woke up and felt like someone was under my covers, lying up against me. When I said something, my blanket visibly deflated, and I no longer felt anything. I include this with doppelgangers because, though I didn't see what I felt under the blanket, it lay like my girlfriend would have lain against me. When I was 22, I was in the military and was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It still took about a year after the diagnosis to separate from the military, but I went home on leave for the holidays about a month after the diagnosis. Anyone who has insulin-dependent diabetes typically carries around some sort of kit. Mine is a black zip-up pouch, and it has a glucometer, insulin pen, needles, and alcohol pads. Right after I left home to head back from leave, my mom texts me to ask if I'm missing my diabetic kit. I look, and I'm not. She sends me a picture of a diabetic kit and asks if I know it. I've never seen this kit before in my life. Apparently, my sister went into her bedroom and discovered it outside of her window, propped up like someone had set it there. Also, her bedroom is on the second floor. Nobody else we know has diabetes.
Story 9. The Haunted Dojo.
Me and my husband own a martial arts school, and the building that it's in, which we also own, is about 130 years old, next to a church. I never believed in the paranormal, but the things that happened in it didn't just happen to me. It was decrepit, which was why it was so cheap to purchase, and we basically did all the work ourselves. It was old, creaky, and drafty. It still had knob and tube wiring that we had to get an electrician to change out. So here's a bunch of things that happened. When we'd be working with drills and electric saws, I'd hear the tinkling of a music box, and I'd stop everyone to ask if they heard it too. No one else did, so I assumed it must have been some music from the church coming through. My husband would often hear a woman's voice calling his name from the bottom of the stairs. It's 2 floors, a basement, and a loft, and thinking it was me back from work, would always ask it to come up. Turns out the building was empty. This happened 4 or 5 times. One night, there's a small apartment on the 2nd floor connected to a large hall. We woke up to hearing what sounded like a broom sweeping across the wooden floors in the large hall. My husband got up to go check, but once he would walk in there, the sweeping sound would stop. It happened 3 more times that night. We chalked it up to mice or squirrels. We did find mummified squirrels in the attic once. We had a barbecue in the backyard, and I needed to go get more utensils. There's stairwell from the backyard up to the 2nd floor, and then there's the main entrance staircase opposite to that. I came up the main entrance and heard footsteps pacing back and forth across the far end of the hall, and thought my husband came up from the metal stairwell to get utensils with me. It was dark, and I couldn't see anything. I called out for him, and the pacing stopped. No response, and then the pacing footsteps continued. Annoyed, I thought he was messing with me, so I flipped on the light, and all of the utensils from the shelf where I heard the pacing crash down to the floor, like I had spooked something. But there wasn't anything, not even a rat like I thought there might be. One Saturday morning, my husband was on his computer in another room, and I was in the apartment playing with a Tamagotchi app on my iPad when I heard the stereo sitting in front of me click on, and a girl's voice started talking from it. I thought he controlled the stereo from his computer, so I ignored it because he often puts on music to work out before class started. He teaches the morning class. I remember thinking, what kind of weird indie music is he listening to anyway? Because the voice just said, "Hi, my name is," I thought I heard Katie. Then I am this year old, I'm from that place, etc. I didn't catch the specifics because I wasn't really listening, but that went on for about 2 or 3 minutes until it suddenly said, "Something's hurting me." When I caught that, I looked up and squinted at the stereo like, what? Something's killing me. Something killed me. At this point, the hair was standing on the back of my neck, and I was getting up from the couch to take a closer look. Please, someone tell my parents, tell the teachers, tell the corrections officer. At the word corrections officer, I bolted into the other room and started yelling at my husband, accusing him of playing a trick on me. I told him, "We don't joke about dead people." He's of course looking at me like, what? When he finally calms me down long enough to understand what I heard and what I was accusing him of, he told me it was impossible and led me to the stereo. It wasn't plugged in. I thought maybe the stereo picked up signals from an audiobook or something. So after that last fiasco, I went to ask our live-in student, who lived with his girlfriend in the basement apartment of the building, if anything weird had happened. They shot each other an alarmed look and told me this. His girlfriend was sleeping one night when he was working overnight, and she heard footsteps come down the stairs and their door open and then close. All of a sudden, a bright flashlight shines in her face, and she can just make out the silhouette of who she thought was her boyfriend, because he's tall, and she could see the dirty jeans he was wearing. She's annoyed, thinking he's messing with her, so she's swatting at him and telling him to stop. Finally, she gets so upset that she turns on their lamp, and there's no one there. They sometimes hear footsteps on the first floor when there's no one in the building. They had a pet mouse at the time, and whenever that happened, it would start doing backflips in its tank. However, when class was going on and there were people in the building, the mouse didn't care and just went about its usual mousy business. They would play wrestling one day when suddenly their African grey parrot ruffled its feathers and, in an alarmed voice, asked, "Who's there? Who's there?" They thought it was funny at first, so our student looked at the bird, pointed to the door, and said, "You mean over here?" and ran towards the door to open it. As he did that, all the books that were lining the shelf on the way to the door fell over in front of him, and the lights started flickering. The bird and the mouse both got spooked and were throwing themselves against their cages. Our second live-in student after the first could not find his phone when he woke up in the morning, when he had placed it next to his bed the night before, which happened multiple times. He would search his room high and low, and then he'd find it perfectly placed right outside his locked bedroom door on the floor. I thought he might have been sleepwalking, but his girlfriend says she'd realize it if he did, since she's a very light sleeper. So I don't know what that's about. Nothing notable has happened since then, but we have also not had anyone stay there overnight in years.
Story 10. Mr. Longneck and the Little Girl.
My 3-year-old daughter talks about a guy called Mr. Longneck and says creepy things about him. I'll begin by saying I'm personally more on the side of a skeptical frame of mind with any paranormal experience. But enough things have happened in the last year to make me at least question that and entertain the possibility that this is legitimate and not just my daughter's active imagination. These events have occurred only in the house my husband and I bought in June of 2017, which was built in the 1920s. First, in October of 2017, I was laying her down for bed in the dark with only moonlight lighting the bedroom. She pointed across the room and asked, "Mom, who's that guy?" I looked for a toy or something she could be referring to, but saw nothing. So I asked, "What guy, honey?" She responded that he was right there and gestured toward the closed bedroom door. Still curious, I asked her what he was doing, in case I could piece together some recent episode of pretend play or a toy she commonly talked about. She said he was hiding. I asked if he was scared. She said no, he's hiding. Creepy. During this whole exchange, she was calm and chipper, not scared. What made it strange was that she was 2 at the time and didn't really engage in pretend play or storytelling at that point. And as I mentioned, no toys were in sight. From there, we just had a funny toddler story to tell our friends and family that we affectionately named That Guy. This is the umbrella name we generally use for any other episodes or weird things that happen around the house. That guy is pulling a prank. Next, in January or February of 2018, I was again laying her down for bed along with her then 6-month-old brother. We were doing the usual cuddle up, night-night talk when she said something along the lines of, "Now it's time for bed. Just me and you and him and her." My skeptical mind would argue that him could easily have been her little brother. But at the time she was still adjusting to having a sibling and rarely mentioned him, and he wasn't included in any of her talk that we were just having. What was really strange was her. Who's her? The only other female in the house is our cat, and she wasn't in the room at the time. Also, no toys were in bed with us, and none were in the near vicinity of her bed that she could have been talking about. A little later that spring, a new name came into conversation, Mr. Longneck. A short backstory. My daughter has this weird thing where she likes touching necks. Sometimes it's cuddly, sometimes it's when she's playing. We can't really explain it other than that kids do weird things sometimes, and it started before we moved into this house. Anyway, she was getting put down for a nap and was a little high-strung. She was doing her usual neck-grabbing thing and suddenly did it a little tougher than usual, but not enough to hurt, and said in a growly voice, "Mr. Longneck." Mr. Longneck. I had never heard her use this name, and it isn't a character in any YouTube or Netflix show she watches, so I asked who Mr. Longneck was. She just kind of giggled it off and was asleep 10 minutes later. This was when I started getting creeped out a bit by her stories. In April of 2018, my husband found a time capsule in one of our heating vents, and we spent the afternoon looking through it. There had been a fire in our home in 2009, which we knew about, and in which no one was hurt. During the renovation after the fire, the owners at the time found a bunch of old things in the walls and included it with some pictures of the fire and a couple of newspaper clippings. Among the old things was a pack of pearl buttons, some store catalogues from the 1940s, and a small notebook with some handwritten names inside. I presume these are the names of the original inhabitants, and I plan to find the book again and look up the history behind the names inside, as well as the home. After all this, my husband and I are suspicious that if there is something paranormal going on, maybe these objects are keeping some energy here or something. I know this is long, but we're almost done here. In about October 2018, I was driving to my mother's house with only my son and daughter in the car. Along the way, my daughter, now 3, asked from the back seat, "Mom, is that Grandpa?" I said, "Where?" She pointed to the empty front seat and said, "Right there." I told her Grandpa was at home, as he had just recently moved in with us due to health issues. There was no one around on the street or sidewalks for her to point at either. Now, there have been minor other events that have happened, but these were the biggest ones to describe in detail. I've posted this in another online forum as well and received advice to engage her further in conversation when it comes up. While we have done so to an extent to encourage her to be comfortable talking about it, I never pushed it in order to avoid leading the conversation or pulling answers out of her that she would offer just to appease the conversation. One day though, and a few times after, I just decided to ask her about it, and various other questions led to. Mr. Longneck is a grown-up. He wears monster clothes and a hat. He is nice but also scary. He says trick or treat but doesn't wear a costume. He lives far away. She says he comes to our house at nap time, which she no longer has but was generally in the afternoon. He knocks on our big door, which is the patio one, and walks through the kitchen. These were her exact words. And while she was telling me this, she was pointing a path from the door to one of our living room windows. I asked what he says or does, and among a few things, she mentioned he played in the kitchen with her with the spinny cow toy. This is one of those Fisher-Price pull-string farm toys. She never plays with it. I rarely see it and have never seen it in the kitchen. The specific details of this piqued my interest for sure. I also asked if he ever brought a friend to see if I could follow up on the her mentioned earlier. He brings a friend. She is a little girl, not a grown-up, and has yellow hair like me. She is never scared of these talks, although she withdraws from the conversation when I ask about his neck and why it is long.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.